Okay. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We're going to begin. Like I said a second ago, I've actually been waiting for 3 years to give a class on this topic. I was in somewhere, which I'll tell you at the end of the class, where in Tel Aviv in my tour guiding course a few years ago. And we went to this place and we heard a story from a guide, and she was so interesting. I said, I need to retell it. And I've been waiting for the opportunity. And today is the perfect opportunity because what I learned and what I'm going to share with you has to do with Yom Haatzmaut. So I know without a doubt that you will be going into Yom Haatzmaut with a greater understanding, appreciation. So I'm so excited to share it with you. Let me share my screen. Let me just make sure it's ready to be shared. Okay. Okay. So November 29th, 1947, if you came to Israel, you would see that everybody was in their living rooms, all around, or their kitchens, all around the radio with a pencil and paper and taking a tally of how many countries want Israel to be a state, how many countries don't want Israel to be a state, and how many countries abstained. Because on November 29th, there was the famous vote of the UN, is Israel going to be a state or not? And as we know, there were 33 that voted in favor, 13 said no way, and 10 abstained, which gives us a state. People went out into the streets and celebrated, and November 29th, 1947 is a very historic date. So historic that there are actually streets in Israel that are named Kaftet b'November. Nearby where I live in Jerusalem, imagine telling someone you live on a street that's a date, but it's such a significant date that it's a street name. You could learn a lot in Israel by street names. And I want to ask you, and this is one of the things we're going to be answering today, what led to this? Because it's not like the UN just woke up one day and said, hey, let's vote if Israel should be a country or not. And the backstory of what happened to it, I think is so fascinating. It's almost as good as the actual vote. And there's 3 questions I want to focus on. One is, how was the UN vote an even greater miracle than we already thought? And of course, we know it's a miracle because today, if the UN had to vote about Israel, everyone hates Israel. So how then did it happen? It's a miracle, but what led up to it is an even greater, maybe. Second question is, what crucial role did Golda Meir have in aiding us during the War of Independence? So Golda Meir was one of Israel's prime ministers, but before she was a prime minister, she assisted a lot in the founding of the state, and she was good friends with Ben Gurion and involved in the government. So she also had an important role. And the third question is, what does the text of Megilat Haatzmaut actually say? Megilat Haatzmaut, here's a small snapshot of it, is Israel's Declaration of Independence. What's in it? And the last question I want to tack on is, where in Israel can we visit to learn more? And the answer to this question is where I learned about everything I'm about to share. And I also listened to a podcast from one of the people that works in this place who shared more information. I'm going to save that till the end, because what would be a Zoom about Israel without me giving you a new place to go to? So the first question I asked is, what happened all of a sudden that we have the UN voting for Israel? So after World War I, the British were given a mandate for Palestine, which meant that they were in charge temporarily of Palestine until the countries could figure out what's going on there, who's going to rule. And it was ultimately not really so great for the British because nobody wanted them there. The Arabs didn't want them there. The Arabs revolted from 1936 to 1939. The Jewish people didn't want them there, and the Jews also had their share of revolts. So you're in a country ruling and nobody wants you there. And the British decided that they had enough, and they approached the UN and they told the UN, we want to end the mandate. And the UN, what they did then is they got a special delegation together called the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. And they sent this delegation to Israel, which was in Palestine. And they had the people go all over the country to try to figure out, what should we do now? The British don't want to be here anymore. What's the next best move? And what the UN decided is the only solution to the ruling of the people is what's very famous, the UN partition plan. They said, we need to divide Israel. We'll give, you see in yellow, this portion to the Arabs. In orange, we'll give that to the Jews. and Bethlehem and Jerusalem were supposed to be international states. This is what they decided to do. And that's how eventually we get to the vote on November 29th, 1947. Where does Israel stand on the world stage? So I said in the opening of the class that if today Israel had to, let's say the question came up, should Israel continue being a country? And everyone had to vote. Most probably people would vote against, because we know Israel does not have a lot of friends. And what about then in 1947, where did Israel stand? So the members of it wasn't even a government because they weren't an official country, but the people working to further things along in Israel, they knew exactly where Israel stood, and they knew Israel was not viewed favorably by the rest of the world. And now I want to share a fact with you, which was mind-blowing to me when I learned. The original date for the UN vote was supposed to be on November 26th, 1947, not November 29th. What happened? So November 26th, 1947, the vote is going to take place. And before the vote, any country that wants to speak and say whatever they want on the topic or about whatever else they want is allowed to get up and speak. So you have countries speaking, and Moshe Sharet, who was Israel's representative there, he's listening and he goes, oh no, we are not going to get a majority. Even the countries that promised that they're going to vote in favor, I see now they're backing out, they're changing their mind. If we have the vote today, we are not going to get a country. We need to delay this vote. We need to do something. So then what he does is here's a picture of Moshe Sharet. He goes to the countries that were friendly and he says, you need to get back up there in the pulpit and you need to speak. But we have nothing to talk about. I don't care. Go up. He speaks to the head of Uruguay who says, but I already went up twice. I don't care. You go up a third time. Read from the Tanakh, read from the prophets, speak about whatever you want. We need to delay this vote. Just get up and speak. And that's what goes on. And also in the US government today, we have that concept. It's called, the official term is filibuster. So people are speaking. The clock is ticking. And meanwhile, the Arab countries, they realize what's going on, that they're supposed to have this vote for Israel. And people are just getting up and speaking. So they get nervous and they start screaming, the vote, we need to do the vote. But then all of a sudden at 7 o'clock p.m., the head of the committee, he bangs the hammer and says, that's it, everyone, we need to go home. We can't do the vote, the day is over. And then he says something amazing for us. He says, and the vote is going to be pushed off another day. Why? Because the following day, November 27, 1947, was Thanksgiving. And of course, you can't meet on Thanksgiving. So while everyone's enjoying their turkey dinner, what Moshe Sharet and other heads of people involved are doing, they're making these frantic phone calls to different heads of countries to get them to vote in favor of Israel. And you see here on the left is a picture of someone sleeping in their bed. They literally woke up people in the middle of the night. You need to vote for Israel. You need to. There are even certain countries nearby that they said, we're not going to do business with you if you don't vote in favor for us. They were doing everything in their power to get votes. Now, Thanksgiving passes. Next day, November 28, 1947, the vote is supposed to go on. And Moshe Sharet sees they're still not going to get the majority. So he does the same thing as before. He tells people, speak, just speak about anything. We need to delay the vote again. So that's what happens. They speak again. And then finally, and the same thing, the vote, 7 o'clock, delayed. Now we get to November 29th, 1947. The Moshe Sharet feels that there are enough countries that will vote in favor. Of course, he can't be sure, but he hopes. And they have the vote. And which brings us back to the first slide in the class. Everyone's around their radios, tallying, and we have a state. The Jewish people go out and they're celebrating and they're dancing. Everyone is really, really so happy and so excited. Everyone except for one person. There's one, and the Arabs, of course, were not happy about this. There's one person that was in a hotel room that night by the Dead Sea. And actually, if you ever go to En Gedi or Masada, so there's a gas station and there's always, you can go on camel rides there. I don't put a picture here because I don't really know why I did, but they have these like abandoned buildings. And one of them used to be where they had this hotel where this man stayed, and he's hearing the UN vote and he's not going out in the streets and celebrating. And this man is David Ben Gurion. He hears the results and he writes in his journal, I feel lonely and sad among those who are celebrating. We don't have a single cannon, no warplanes. How can we stand against Arab armies? David Ben Gurion knows that this means war. And he also knows that where beforehand, when the Jewish people were fighting, they were fighting against Arabs, local Arabs. They weren't this organized army. He knows if the countries of the world invade Israel, they have organized armies, they have money, they have planes. Israel does not stand a chance. So that's his reaction when Israel is declared a state. Now I want to move on to the next question, continue the story. And I want to ask, what crucial role did Golda Meir play in aiding us during the War of Independence? So Ben Gurion realizes what we need if we are going to survive is we need money. And where do we get money from? The place where we get money from is still used today. Everybody guess. He says we need to go to America and we need to ask the American Jews there for money. And it's like funny that we're even asking because we're not even a government, we're not even a country. Who are we? But we need money. So he says, I'm going to go on a plane, I'm going to fly to America, and I'm going to speak to the heads of different communities there and hope to get money. And there's a woman and she's in the room and she goes, absolutely not. You are not going. We need you here. She says, I'll go. He says, no, I'm going. She says, no, I'm going to go. And they do a quick vote and they vote that she's going to go. Ben Gurion says, you don't even have time to get your suitcases. She leaves that night to America. She has $10 in her pocket. And what she does, she goes to Chicago because that's where they had leaders of the Jewish community, and she speaks to them. And she's so passionate and she electrifies them that not only are they all tearing from her, they reach into their pockets and she walks out in one night with $1 million. She spends the next 6 weeks in America, flying sometimes even twice a day to get support for the hopefully soon to be Jewish state. And she's not going out to extravagant dinners. She's not going to plays. She's not doing all these things, which I think is really respectable that she doesn't do these things, because now I think of like when different heads of states and countries go, they have fancy dinners and they go here and they go there and you need all the security and people to check that everything's okay. And like, think of how much money they have to go on a special airplane. She just got on a flight, needed to collect money. And the amount that she, after 6 weeks, the amount that she raises is above and beyond anyone's expectations. She raises $50 million, which back then is the equivalent of raising $500 million. And this is amazing because the soon to be, we hope, Jewish state needs money. And now they can buy weapons from Czech, except even that is problematic because the British put an embargo and it's not legal to just buy weapons. So they have to do it secretly. But the fact that she went to America and raised so much money for us was very, very helpful. What's happening in the meantime? As she's there raising money, the Jews and Arabs are fighting. So the War of Independence, there were two parts. We had the first part right after the UN declared that Israel was a state, where you have all the Arabs fighting. And then you have the second part after Ben Gurion declared Israel, where you have all the countries attacking. But in the meantime, they're all fighting. And what's going on in America? America sees, hey, the UN just declared that we're going to partition the state. Israel's going to get part and the Arabs are going to get part. And it's not really working, because if the Arabs are sitting and attacking, then clearly this is not a good idea. So you know what? Let's cancel the plan and let's come up with something else. And Moshe Sharet, who's in America, he's sending messages to Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion, the Americans want to cancel it. Things are not going well. So in 1 year, he has this voice and how America doesn't like this anymore. And America always controls everything. And then, like I said, the Arabs are attacking the Jews. So Ben Gurion has to deal with all of this. And he had nerves of steel. I gave previous classes on Ben Gurion. I know there's people that like him, there's people that don't, because he made a lot of decisions in his lifetime that are very controversial. But I think it's hard to argue with the fact that he was a strong leader and he made decisions when he needed to. And now the question is, what does he do? Does he cancel the plan? Does he not? And he decides to do two things. One, he creates something, Megilat or Mu'atzat Ta'am, which is this temporary Knesset and temporary government leaders, because he said we need people to come and vote, and on the future of the Jewish state, which is like, it was just such a monumental decision. You're voting on the future of the Jewish people of the state that doesn't even exist. He also speaks to the generals of the war that are dealing in this war of independence. And he tells them, we need to change our tactic. Our new tactic needs to be, you guys go on the offensive. We're not defending anymore. You go and attack, and you do what needs to be done. And once Israel made that change, really we started winning. Also, another thing which helped is in the middle of the war, there was a ceasefire, which was really great for Israel because then they were able to renew strength. So he makes this decision. Now, I want to share a very interesting fact with you. He makes up this temporary Knesset, and America, just for perspective, for comparison purposes, has about 300 million citizens, and there's two major parties, Republican and Democrat. Israel at the time had 600,000 citizens, and how many parties? 13 parties. So even from 1948, there's so many different parties that are representing the people. We know today there's 100 and the 13 parties, and there were 13 members of the Knesset then. Now we have 120, and I can't even tell you how many parties, because every time Israel has new elections, there's a new number of parties. I think it's 30 something parties. So their voice is really, really heard. So this is what he decides to do. And now he has a meeting. Oh, and also another thing, which I think we even see today, is Ben Gurion. He wants to get a meeting with this committee. Let's vote on things. But it never even works, because every time he wants to meet with them, one person's in Jerusalem, another one can't come, this one is busy, so okay, we can't meet. So they actually didn't really meet that much, but in theory they existed. So now he has a meeting with them. He said, let's decide the fate of Israel. They knew that the British were going to leave on May 15th, 1948. And Ben Gurion didn't want there to be a vacuum. After they leave, what are we doing? Who's in charge? He wanted to know exactly what was going on. What he wanted to do is for Israel to declare its independence, but he said, let me get other people's opinions. Let me see. Let's vote. Should we declare Israel's independence right after the British leave, or should we not? And there's 10 representatives at this meeting, because there were 2 in Jerusalem and another person not. He spoke to them anyway. And all of a sudden, Golda Meir, she walks into the room, and she was coming from the secret meeting she had in Jordan the night before with the leader. And Jordan originally promised her, we will not enter the war. Don't worry, we're not going to enter. And she goes and meets with in Jordan, and they tell her, look, I know that we promised you that we're not going to enter, but we need to break our promise, because all the Arab nations are going to enter the war, the countries, and they're going to expect us to do the same. And I need to break the promise, and we need to enter the war. So she takes this piece of paper. She doesn't even have the heart to tell Ben Gurion. And she writes on the piece of paper, Tiyeh Melchama, there will be a war. She puts it on his desk. He looks at it, and she writes later, Golda Meir, that he doesn't even flinch from reading that. And it's crazy news. So that's Golda Meir's news. Who also comes bursting in the meeting? Moshe Sharet from America. Everyone's really excited to hear what he has to say. And he says, the Americans think we should wait. We should not declare a state now. They're not going to support us. And David Ben Gurion, he listens to what everyone says. And then he realizes, I need to get up and speak. And he speaks to everyone, and he says, friends, it's now or never. We need to declare the state of Israel. And they vote. And 6 say, let's declare independence now. And 4 vote, let's hold off our decision. Now is not the right time. We should side with the Americans. And they have the majority. 6 is more than 4. Now, I want to tell you something anecdotal about the vote. There's this is not a confirmed story, because there's different versions given even by the people involved. But there's a story that David Ben Gurion knew the Moshe Sharet was going to come to the meeting and talk about how much America doesn't want people to support Israel right now and push it off. So according to the story, he takes Moshe Sharet and he locks him in a room in his house, and he says, you are not leaving this room until you tell me that you are going to support voting for the state of Israel. Now, I say the story is questionable because Ben Gurion's son says that the room in question didn't even have a door in it. So might be true, might not be true, but it's not even so long ago. So how could there be so much why is it so unclear? Just ask them. But That's one thing. Now, if you think that was unclear, I want to share something else that's also unclear. Ben Gurion says, we never really voted. It wasn't an official vote. I was just getting their general opinions. I was going to do what I wanted anyway. Just wanted to know what they thought. Yet the secretary at the meeting writes, of course it was an official vote. So you can't even get the people in the meeting to agree in retrospect on whether or not this is an official vote, not official vote. So those are just things on the side. But I think the general story that's told is they had this vote, 6 in favor, 4 against. Now, May 15th, 1948, the British are supposed to leave. And it makes sense that right after they leave, they declare the state of Israel. However, they are leaving on a Saturday, and Saturday is Shabbat. And as a Jewish country, they're not going to declare their independence on Shabbat. So they decide, okay, 15 hours before the British leave, we're going to declare our independence. Let's move it up to Friday. And those were their plans for the declaration. Now, they declared it was done in Tel Aviv. Why Tel Aviv? Because Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. The reason why is because we had the War of Independence and Jerusalem was locked. If you try to get to Jerusalem, you have all these convoys that are trying to give Jerusalem supplies and they get shot. You can't just go to Jerusalem. So they said, we'll do it where we are. So they met in Tel Aviv and they borrow chairs from a coffee house. They borrow a rug from another store owner and they make sure the microphones are there, a flag of Israel, a picture of Herzl. I want to point out something cute. The company that put the microphones in place to make sure that everything is going to be recorded and work. So their name of the company is Tzliel, which means like sound. And I guess you could say this is the first official advertisement in the state of Israel, because they want to make sure everyone knows they are the company responsible for the good quality broadcasting of Ben Gurion's speech. So that's everything's in order, except there's one thing that's not ready. And what's not ready, oh wait, I'm going to save that. I want to share the invitation with you. So they invited about 350 people. And they said, we wish to keep the contents of this gathering secret, as well as the date a secret, because they don't want everyone to know what they're doing. And the dress code, they wrote dress b'bigdei chag for a holiday. Why do they have to say that? Because a lot of the people, they're kibbutznikim, and they're not going to come fancy. They're going to come in their farm clothes. So they said dress for a holiday. It's a very honorable event. Everything is in place, but Israel's Declaration of Independence. What are they going to say? In winter 1947, there were actually already the first drafts being written towards Israel's declaration because they knew the British were going to leave, and they started writing drafts. And then one of the drafts is brought to Moshe Sharet, and his daughter says, I was with my dad in the room, and my dad is pacing back and forth, and he's speaking, and I'm writing. And he revises the draft. He gives the draft. Everyone looks at it, and he says, first of all, it's long, 22 paragraphs, and the 22 paragraphs all begin with the word ho'il. Ho'il means since. And the people that drafted this, they were lawyers. They're from a legal background. And the way they wrote the declaration was like a contract. And Ben Gurion looks at it and he says, this is not Hebrew. Ho'il, 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 since. We can't have a declaration like this. This is a declaration that's going to represent us. The other nations are going to be reading it. We want them to know who we are and to accept us. We're not writing a contract over here. So he takes it, and the night before he's revising it, and he rewrites the declaration. Now, third question, we said, what does the text of the Megilat Haatzmaut actually say? So we're going to touch on that a bit. Three of the questions that Ben Gurion had to answer were, who are the Jews? What are they doing here? What do they want? Now, if you go to the Jewish library up until that point, and you want to answer these questions, where are you going to look? Especially if you want a concise answer. Maybe the Tanakh, but that's a lot of reading to do because the Tanakh explains who Am Yisrael is and Eress Yisrael and that God gave it to us. What do they want? Maybe you could read books from Zionism, from some writers, but there was no document up until that point which summarized very short and concise who are the Jews, what do they want, what's their future? And that was one of the things he wanted to do. So we're not going to read the text together. That's something, if it interests you, you could Google and find it, but it basically summarizes in one document who the Jews are, what brings them to Israel, naturally what brings them to Israel, politically, what was on stage in the world to bring them here, and what's their future aspirations. And the Megilat Haatzmaut is basically Israel's birth certificate. Now, one of the debates when writing it was, do we use the word God or not? Which is unbelievable that there was even a debate. We're a Jewish country and we're debating if we should put the word Elokim in the Megillah. So there were religious people that said, of course we're going to put it, we're a Jewish country. And even countries which aren't necessarily religious use the word God. Go to America's Constitution, even their dollar bills, in God we trust. We're actually debating this. And the Chiloni people say, the non-religious people, of course we're not going to put God's name in. This is a political document. This is not a religious document, and we don't believe in God anyway. So then they came up with a compromise that instead of the word Elokim, they're going to put the term Sur Yisrael. Sur Yisrael, literally the rock of Israel. Sur Yisrael, referring to God, who's Israel's rock. And even on that, originally the religious people wanted to put Sur Yisrael v'go'alo, and the Redeemer. And the Chilonim said, absolutely not, we're not putting redemption. Meanwhile, if we're talking about redemption, what more clear redemption is there than this? So they compromised. And if you look, I thought I included the wrong part. Right here, mitoch bitachon betzur Yisrael. So this is the only mention of God in the Megillah. Now everyone wins with this because the religious people say Tzur Yisrael is clearly God, and the irreligious people say Tzur Yisrael, the strength of Israel, the people. It's not referring to God, and that's how that was settled. I want to point out, altogether with the 37 people that signed it, they weren't all there right then, but eventually they did. And I want to point out something very interesting. So if you look over here, so it's towards the bottom, the second signature from the bottom. There's a rabbi that signed it, and there's these 4 Bet Ein Zayin Hey Be'ezrat Hashem. So you have everything there. And you see different people's personalities. Some people wrote small, some people wrote huge, some people wrote dark. And then you have the radio talking about this and announcing it. And usually what the person broadcasting would say was Shalom was the name. And now for the first time ever, she says Shalom Mikol Yisrael, because they decided to call the new country Eress Yisrael. And now she's speaking from Israel. It's officially a country now. David Ben Gurion, he reads the entire Megilat Haatzmaut. So here's a picture, original. We see Theodore Herzl, a picture of him on top. Then Shechianu is said. They sing Hatikva. There was actually an orchestra which was on the 2nd floor of the building because there's no room on the 1st. Because how could you have a meeting without singing Hatikva? And with that, 32 minutes later, the meeting was over. Medinat Yisrael was established, and 2,000 years of exile were behind us. I feel like I need to applause for myself, not for myself. I need to applause for Ben Gurion, and wow, it's amazing. So the question I had on the bottom in small was, where in Israel can we visit to learn more? So here is the original room where Ben Gurion declared the state of Israel. And not everything in it is original, but this is what it looked like. You can find this room in a place called Haatzmaut or Bet Haatzmaut in Tel Aviv. This is where I learned the story. And there's even more details to learn. It is so cool. And I don't know the bar mitzvah. You don't have to be in a bar mitzvah to go, but you can. And they have really, really great guides there. And whoever the guide is could tell you the story. I think it's really nice because it gives you appreciation for Israel. And then they have a short movie where they show Ben Gurion's declaration. So this is in Tel Aviv, and it's one of my favorite. I say that about everything, but this really is one of my favorite places. Right now it's under construction. So they have a temporary Bet Haatzmaut, but I think in a few years it'll be ready. So that's where you can learn more about the story. So now to summarize, we opened with the UN vote in 1947, and then we asked ourselves what led up to it. And we said the British mandate ended, and they said the UN, we want to leave. The UN decided, okay, well, we need to divide the country. The original date for the vote was November 26th, but then Moshe Sharet realized that he wasn't going to get a majority, so they delayed the vote. He's making frantic phone calls to people to try to get a majority. In Israel, the celebrations in the streets, they're so happy. Ben Gurion is the only one not happy because he realizes that this means war. He wants to travel to America to raise money. Golda travels instead. She's very, very successful. Ben Gurion decides we need to be on the offensive. We need to make this temporary Knesset. Do we declare the state of Israel or do we wait? And he decides we need to declare it right now. A lot of work on the text of the declaration. He finally comes up with the final draft, reads it, and Am Yisrael's Galut is over. We have the country of Israel. We're able to rule ourselves. You can learn more about this in Haatzmaut. And the last line I want to end with is in I said before class started, I was talking to Ralph Beta, and I said I stopped reading the news as frequently as I do. I usually read it 3 times a day, and now I really stopped because it's just hard for me to read it that Israel had their 4th elections and they can't get a Knesset together, they can't get the parties together, and it's very frustrating. And I don't want to be frustrated every day, so that I could do it infrequently. But something that I remind myself, and I'm going to remind all of us, that at the end of the day, no matter what government we have or don't have, anything is better than being under the British. So to take a step back and realize how amazing it is and what a berachah is that we can rule ourselves, it's just really a gift from God. And I hope we enter Yom Haatzmaut and really, really thank God for the wonderful country that we live in that's here for us, our home, to protect us, and even greater appreciation of the miracle and everything that went into it. Thank you so much for being here. Enjoy the rest of Yom, well, not enjoy really Yom HaZikaron, but have a meaningful rest of Yom HaZikaron and a happy Yom Haatzmaut.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Adele, that was great. Thank you.
And I was wondering who that was.
That's
okay, now I didn't know you spell your name like that.
Yeah. Like
Thank you for
legally.
joining.
All right, it was great. So we'll be in touch, okay?
Bye.
Bye.
Great class.
Bye, Ralph. Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.